The stars looked quiet from the shuttle window, but Kyle knew the universe was never truly silent. He leaned back in his seat, arms crossed, thinking about the mission ahead. The United Human Federation had sent him to repair a communication tower on a distant alien colony, HFY 7. He had heard about it before. It was a cold, windy place with rocky ground and endless skies. The tower had gone silent a week ago, and no one knew why. The colony had requested help, and Kyle was the best engineer available. What made this mission different, though, was who he'd be working with. She was Cerulean. The Ceruleans were not enemies, but not quite friends either. They had made peace with humans after a long history of mistrust. Since then, small efforts had been made to work together. This mission was one of those efforts. Kyle didn't know much about the alien woman he'd be partnering with, just that her name was Vela, and that she was a technician on the tower. His shuttle landed with a soft bump, and the doors hissed open. A sharp wind met him as he stepped outside, and the air felt colder than expected. The sky above was a strange shade of pale green, and jagged rock formations lined the horizon like sharp teeth. A group of Cerulean guards stood nearby. Among them, a woman stepped forward. She was tall, with pale blue skin that shimmered slightly under the sunlight. Her hair was tied back in soft silver braids, and her eyes were large and calm. She wore a simple uniform, tight around her frame, with a utility belt and a small toolkit strapped to her hip. Her small ears pointed slightly upward, just like in the pictures Kyle had seen, but her expression was soft. "You are the human engineer, Kyle?" she asked, her voice smooth and clear. "Yes," he replied, surprised by how fluent her English was. "I am Vela. I will assist you. Please follow me." Without another word, she turned and began walking toward a transport vehicle. Kyle followed, noticing the quiet way she moved, almost like she floated just above the ground. They didn't talk much during the ride to the tower. Vela kept her eyes on the road, and Kyle glanced at her from time to time, curious but unsure what to say. She didn't seem cold, just distant, as if she was guarding something inside. The communication tower stood tall and broken when they arrived. The top panel had been burned by something, maybe a solar flare, maybe a short circuit. The nearby equipment was still intact, but frozen over by the planet's cold winds. Kyle got to work quickly, pulling out his tools and starting diagnostics. Vela stood beside him, scanning energy patterns with a device that looked older than anything he'd seen before. "You've done this before?" Kyle asked, trying to break the silence. "Many times," she said without looking at him, "but never with a human." He smiled a little. "Me neither. Never worked with an alien." She finally glanced at him. There was a small pause. Then she said, "It is not so different." From that moment, something shifted between them. Over the next few days, they worked side by side. They repaired broken panels, rewired systems, and replaced parts that had rusted or frozen. Kyle noticed how careful she was, always checking everything twice, never rushing. She was brilliant, in a quiet, focused way. And she started to open up. She told him about her home world, which had been destroyed in a war long before peace with humans. She spoke of her people's long journey to find safety, and how they still feared losing it. Kyle shared stories about Earth, how messy and loud it could be, but how full of life it was. They laughed at small things, argued over methods, and learned to trust each other. One night, after a long day of work, they sat outside the tower near a small heater. The sky was clear, full of stars. "Your world sounds warm," Vela said, looking up. "It is," Kyle replied. "Sometimes too warm. You miss it?" He nodded. "Sometimes. But I like it here too. It's different, but peaceful." There was a pause. Then Vela said, softly, "You are not like the others." Kyle looked at her. "Other humans?" She nodded. "Yes. You listen. You care." That is rare. He smiled. Maybe you're just easy to care about. She didn't respond, but her eyes met his and stayed there. In that moment, something unspoken passed between them. Neither moved, neither spoke, but something had begun, something deeper than just friendship, something that neither of them fully understood yet. The mission was going well. The tower was nearly fixed. But Kyle felt it in his chest. This trip wasn't going to be simple. And something told him it had only just begun. The wind howled across the rocky plains of HFY 7. Kyle tightened the collar of his jacket as he checked the final connections on the communication tower. Beside him, Vela held her scanner steady, her silver braids swaying slightly in the breeze. The tower lights blinked green. Finally, they had restored the system. "It's working," Kyle said with a small grin. Vela nodded. "Signal restored. They will receive messages now." Kyle looked up at the sky. The greenish clouds were starting to move quickly, forming strange twirling shapes. "That doesn't look good," he muttered. Vela followed his gaze. Her expression grew serious. "A plasma storm is coming." "Plasma storm." She nodded. "Violent. Dangerous. We must take shelter immediately." Before Kyle could ask further, she grabbed her toolkit and motioned for him to follow. They ran across the rocky path to a small domed structure near the base of the tower. It was a temporary emergency shelter, installed for situations like this. The door hissed open, and they entered just as the first flash of lightning lit the sky. Inside, the air was warmer. The shelter was simple, a round metal room with soft lighting, a heater, 2 seats, and emergency supplies. The wind outside roared louder, making the walls hum. Kyle sat down and exhaled deeply. "That came fast," he said. Vela closed the door panel and sat across from him. Cerulean storms do not wait. Sometimes they last minutes, sometimes days. Kyle raised an eyebrow. "You're saying we might be stuck in here for days?" She gave a small nod. "Possibly. We should prepare." Kyle looked around. "Well, at least it's cozy." She didn't laugh, but there was a tiny smile on her lips. Time passed slowly inside the dome. The sound of the storm was steady, like waves crashing endlessly in the sky. Kyle and Vela took turns heating emergency rations and running diagnostics on their equipment. When work was done, silence filled the space between them. To break it, Kyle began telling stories from Earth. Funny ones, strange ones, stories about his first time using alien tools, and the time he got lost on a moon station because the signs were written upside down. Vela listened quietly, then finally shared her own stories. She told him about the time she tried to fix a broken drone as a young trainee and accidentally made it spin in circles for hours. Kyle laughed so hard he almost dropped his cup. "That poor drone," he said. "I was punished," she replied. "But secretly, I laughed too." Kyle noticed that her face had softened. She seemed more relaxed, less guarded. As night fell, the shelter lights dimmed automatically. Kyle sat on his sleeping mat, staring at the soft glow of the heater. Vela sat nearby, rushing her fingers across a small glowing crystal she wore on a chain around her neck. "That's beautiful," Kyle said, pointing to it. "It belonged to my mother," she replied. "It holds warmth and memories." Kyle tilted his head. "Memories. It's an old tradition," she explained. "Some crystals can store feelings. They glow brighter when you are happy, or when you feel close to someone." Kyle watched as the crystal pulsed gently in her hand. He wasn't sure what that meant, but he didn't ask. There was a long silence between them. Then Vela looked up and said, "Why did you come here, truly?" Kyle blinked. "I told you. I was sent to repair the tower." "Yes. But why you?" "This planet is far, cold, quiet. Most humans avoid it." Kyle thought for a moment. "Maybe I just needed a break. From noise, from people, from everything." Vela nodded slowly. I understand that. They sat in silence again. But this time, it wasn't awkward. It was peaceful. Then, quietly, Kyle said, "I'm glad it was you." Vela looked at him, surprised. "I mean," he continued, "I've worked with lots of people. But this, it feels different." She didn't reply at first. Then she reached for the crystal again. It was glowing a little brighter now. "I feel it too," she whispered. Their eyes met. The air between them felt warm despite the storm outside. Something was growing, something they hadn't expected. Trust, connection, maybe even something deeper. That night, the storm raged louder than ever. But inside the dome, two souls sat closer than ever before, hearts slowly shifting in quiet, unspoken ways. They didn't know yet how much would change. But fate had already started moving. The storm outside raged on, its violent winds pushing against the shelter, but inside, the small dome was calm. The soft glow of the heater filled the space, and the quiet between Kyle and Vela was no longer uncomfortable. It had become something else. A shared silence, comfortable and yet charged with something neither could explain. Kyle couldn't help but watch Vela as she sat cross-legged on her mat, her eyes downcast, the faint light reflecting off her soft blue skin. The way she held the small crystal, her fingers moving across it, as though it held the answers to everything. It was as if she was somewhere else, somewhere far away, lost in her thoughts. The words they had shared earlier seemed to have lingered in the air between them, and Kyle felt something stir inside him. Something more than curiosity, more than admiration for the alien woman before him. It was a pull, a deep, quiet yearning to understand her better, to be closer. "Vela," Kyle said softly, breaking the silence. She looked up at him, her eyes calm but uncertain. "Yes. You're not like the others." She tilted her head slightly. "The others. The other Xerillians," Kyle explained, sitting up straighter. "I don't know much about your people, but I've met a few. None of them act like you. You're different." Vela's expression softened, and she sighed, setting the crystal down beside her. "We are all different. Even among my people, there are those who are more open, more willing to embrace others. And then there are those who fear the unknown." Kyle nodded slowly, his gaze never leaving her. "I don't think you fear much." A small smile tugged at the corner of Vela's lips, but it was gone before Kyle could decide if it had been real. She leaned forward slightly, eyes searching his face. "You misunderstand. I have feared much. Fear is a part of us all. You too." Kyle blinked. "What do you mean?" "The unknown. The difference between us. The past that divides us," she said, her voice soft, almost hesitant. "But I am learning not to fear it. Not with you." Her words hit Kyle harder than he expected. He opened his mouth to respond, but before he could, Vela stood up quickly, her face a mask of something Kyle couldn't quite read. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't mean to." But Kyle stood up, his own heart racing. "No, wait. What's going on? You're not making sense, Vela." She turned to face him, her back straight. "I can't." She hesitated, and then her eyes met his with a quiet determination. "There's something I need to tell you, something important." Kyle's stomach tightened, and he could feel his pulse quicken. Whatever she was about to say, it was serious. He took a step closer. "What is it?" Vela took a deep breath, her gaze steady. She placed her hand over her chest, just above her heart, as if gathering the courage to say what was on her mind. "I'm expecting your child." The words hung in the air like an electric shock. Kyle froze, his heart pounding in his chest. "Wait. What?" His mind struggled to process what she had said. "Your child." Vela nodded slowly, her expression unreadable. "Yes, it's true. I know this may be difficult for you to understand, but I didn't plan for it. It happened, and now I must face the consequences." Kyle felt a rush of confusion. His mind raced as he tried to make sense of what she was saying. How is this even possible? We barely know each other. It's rare, Vela said quietly. But it's possible. My people, our biology is different. It's complicated. But when two beings are connected in such a way, something can happen. Something that no one expects. Kyle shook his head, trying to grasp the weight of her words. But why didn't you tell me sooner? Why now? Vela's eyes dropped to the ground. I wanted to tell you. I was just afraid. Afraid of what you might think. Afraid of how this could change everything. Kyle stood still for a moment, trying to find the right words. His head was spinning, but one thing was clear. He wasn't angry, at least, not with her. He didn't know why, but he felt a deep sense of calm in the chaos. She wasn't the one he was angry with. It was himself. He had never been one for surprises, especially ones this big. I don't know what to say, he admitted. I didn't see this coming. Vela looked up, her expression softening. Neither did I. But now that it's happened, we must face it. Together. There was a long pause, and Kyle could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on him. He took a deep breath, trying to calm his racing heart. I'm not sure I'm ready for this, he finally said, his voice quiet. Vela's face hardened, her calm mask slipping for just a moment. Neither am I. Kyle stepped closer to her, his hand reaching out, though unsure if he should. But you're not alone in this, Vela. We'll figure it out. Together. For a moment, it seemed like she might pull away, but then she nodded slowly, her shoulders relaxing. She reached out and placed her hand gently on his. And in that small moment, in the quiet of the storm outside, Kyle realized that life would never be the same. He didn't know where this journey would lead, but he knew he couldn't walk it alone. Not anymore. The next morning, the storm had passed, but the air still felt heavy. The shelter was quiet, and the world outside was beginning to settle. Kyle sat on his mat, his mind swirling with everything Vela had told him. It wasn't just the idea of becoming a father, it was the reality of the situation. He barely knew Vela, yet now they were tied together by something beyond his control. Something powerful, something life-changing. He looked over at her, still sitting by the heater, her eyes closed as she leaned back. Vela was so different from the other Ceruleans he had met. She wasn't like the military leaders or the scientists he had encountered before. She was human in a way that made him feel connected, even though they came from worlds so far apart. Yet there was a shadow in her eyes. It had been there since the night she told him about the child. He could feel that she was holding back something else, something more. I'll go check the tower again, Kyle said, standing up and grabbing his coat. Vela nodded without saying anything. She didn't look up, didn't offer to join him. She was distant, as if she was somewhere else, lost in her thoughts. Kyle hesitated at the door. Vela, are you okay? She didn't answer right away. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft. I'm fine. But there was something in her tone that told Kyle she wasn't. He wanted to ask more, to press her for answers, but instead, he nodded and left the shelter. Outside, the cold air hit him like a slap. The storm had passed, but the planet's unforgiving winds still made it feel as if they were in the heart of a blizzard. He walked toward the communication tower, pulling his coat tighter around him. The tower was still standing tall, its panels shining in the soft morning light. The damage from the storm had been repaired, and the equipment seemed to be working fine. Kyle spent the next few hours running diagnostics and making sure everything was functioning properly. He tried to focus on the task at hand, but his mind kept drifting back to Vela. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Something was off about her behavior. When he finally returned to the shelter, he expected to find Vela still in the same position, deep in thought. But the shelter was empty. The heater was off, and there was no sign of her. Kyle's heart skipped a beat. He quickly checked the small storage area, but she wasn't there either. Vela? He called out, his voice tight with worry. There was no answer. He rushed to the door and stepped outside. The cold wind hit him again, but it wasn't the chill that made him shiver. It was the sinking feeling in his stomach. Something had happened. Vela was gone. Panic started to creep in. He quickly scanned the area, but there was no sign of her anywhere. Kyle's mind raced. She couldn't have gone far. She didn't have enough supplies to travel anywhere. And yet, it didn't make sense. She couldn't have just disappeared. He ran back to the communication tower, checking the landing pad where the shuttle had arrived. The shuttle was gone. His chest tightened. No, she wouldn't leave, he muttered to himself. Not like this. Kyle ran back to the shelter, desperate for answers. But as he entered, he saw something that made his heart drop. On the small table near the heater, a note lay folded neatly, with his name written on the front in delicate handwriting. He quickly picked it up, his fingers trembling as he unfolded it. Kyle, I'm sorry. I didn't want to hurt you, but I must leave. It's safer this way. I've been called back to my people. I can't stay here any longer. The child, it changes everything. And I'm afraid of what might happen if we stay. Please understand. I hope one day you'll forgive me. Vela. The words blurred in front of his eyes. He read them again, and then again, trying to make sense of what she had written. She had left, without a word, without even saying goodbye. Kyle sank to the floor, the note still clutched in his hand. His heart felt like it was being torn apart. Why had she left? They had barely even begun to understand each other, barely begun to acknowledge what was between them. He wasn't ready for this. He wasn't ready to face the future, his future, with a child he hadn't even known existed until the night before. But he had wanted to be there for her. He had wanted to try. And now she was gone. Vela, he whispered, his voice breaking. The cold wind outside seemed to match the emptiness he felt inside. The storm had passed, but the silence that followed felt even worse. He didn't know where she had gone, or why she had left so suddenly. All he knew was that she had taken part of him with her. For the first time since arriving on Xerillia 7, Kyle didn't know what to do. He had no plan, no direction, only the empty shelter, the cold winds, and the note that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Kyle's fingers tightened around the note, crumpling it slightly as he sat in the cold, silent shelter. The wind outside howled, but it seemed distant, as though the world had gone still around him. He had expected the storm to pass, but it was clear now that the storm inside him was far from over. His mind raced with questions he couldn't answer. Why had Vela left without saying a word? Why had she sent him that note, as if everything could be explained in a few short lines? The note had been clear in some ways, but vague in others. What did she mean by safer this way? What had she feared would happen? He paced the small shelter, the walls closing in around him as the hours passed. His eyes kept drifting to the shuttle landing pad outside, but there was no sign of Vela's shuttle. He had no way of knowing where she had gone, or why she had disappeared so suddenly. He had to find her. Just when the silence was becoming unbearable, Kyle's communicator beeped. The sound broke through his thoughts like a sudden explosion. He quickly grabbed it from the table, hoping for some kind of answer. The screen lit up with an incoming message. The sender was Vela. His heart skipped a beat. He tapped the screen to open it, his hands trembling slightly as the message appeared. Kyle, I know you're confused, and I know you're angry, but I need you to listen. I didn't leave because I wanted to hurt you. I left because it's the only way to protect us. You see, my people, our people, don't understand this. They don't understand what we've shared, what we're about to share. They see it as dangerous, and I can't risk what might happen if they find out. I'm pregnant with your child, Kyle. It changes everything, and I'm afraid it might be the end of everything we've worked for here. Please believe me when I say I wish things could be different. I've gone to the elders. I must follow their decision. I'm sorry, but I cannot stay with you. It's too risky. I know you want to help, but I cannot ask you to be part of this. Not now, not yet. Please understand. I will always remember you. Vela. Kyle read the message again. His breath caught in his chest. She had left, not because she didn't care, but because she had felt there was no other choice. The elders had forced her hand. She had chosen to leave him to protect them both. The pain inside him deepened. He had never imagined a situation like this, never expected that his life could turn so upside down in such a short time. But now he understood why she had left. She had been trying to protect him from something far greater than they both realized. The weight of it all was overwhelming. He was going to be a father, but not in the way he had imagined, not in the way he had hoped. He stared at the message on the screen, unable to move, unable to think straight. His mind kept replaying the moment she had told him, the fear in her eyes, the hesitation. It wasn't just her species that feared the unknown, it was her too. But in that moment, she had chosen to trust him. She had let him in, and now she was gone. His communicator beeped again, pulling him from his thoughts. It was another message from Vela. He opened it, his heart pounding in his chest. Kyle, I didn't want to tell you this, but you need to know. The child we're having is special. It's not just any child. It has powers, abilities that neither of us can fully understand. I don't know what it means for the future, but I do know that it's dangerous for anyone to find out too soon. The elders fear what it could lead to, and if anyone else learns about the child, it could start a war. That's why I had to leave. I couldn't risk that. I couldn't risk you being dragged into something bigger than either of us. Please understand. I'll never forget you. I promise. Vela. The message hit him like a wave crashing into the shore. Powers? Abilities. Kyle's mind struggled to keep up with the weight of her words. He had no idea what Vela meant by the child having powers. But the more he thought about it, the more it made sense. There had been something about Vela that he couldn't quite explain. Something different. Now he understood. The child they were about to bring into the world wasn't just any child. It was something far beyond what he had imagined, and it terrified him. Not just for himself, but for Vela, for the entire galaxy. He couldn't let her face this alone. He wouldn't. There had to be something he could do. He wasn't just going to sit back and let everything fall apart. There was too much at stake now. He couldn't walk away. Kyle wiped his face with his hands, his eyes burning. He stood up and walked to the door of the shelter. The cold wind hit him as soon as he stepped outside, but it didn't matter. He had to find Vela. He had to find her before it was too late. His mind was clear now. He knew what he had to do. He wasn't going to let her go through this alone. He was going to find a way to protect her and their child, no matter what it took. Kyle stood at the edge of the shelter, staring out at the horizon. The wind howled again, but it didn't matter. The storm outside had nothing on the storm inside him. His heart was racing with purpose. He had to find Vela. He wasn't going to let her face this alone. He didn't know how, but he was going to get to her. His communicator buzzed again, and Kyle quickly checked it. A new message flashed across the screen. He opened it, his fingers trembling with a mixture of anticipation and dread. It was from Vela. Kyle, I know you are coming. Please, you must stop. It's not safe for you. It's not safe for anyone. I have made my choice. I've gone to the elders. They will decide my future, but your future, our future, isn't something I can risk anymore. If you come here, if you try to stop me, you will only make things worse. Please understand. I do this because I must. Vela. The message was short, but it hit him hard. Kyle clenched his jaw. She was still trying to protect him, trying to keep him away from whatever storm was brewing. But he wasn't going to listen to her this time. He couldn't. Not when everything was on the line. Kyle's mind raced as he prepared for what came next. He knew he had to act fast. The longer he waited, the harder it would be to find her. He grabbed his gear, securing his pack and making sure everything he needed was in place. He couldn't afford to waste any time. The shuttle was the fastest way to get to the capital. He knew Vela's people well enough to understand their travel systems. If she had gone to the elders, she would be at the central council chamber in the city. Kyle wasn't sure what would happen there, but he couldn't stand by and wait. He had to get to her. He made his way to the shuttle station, his heart pounding in his chest. As he approached, he noticed something strange. The area was quiet. Too quiet. He had expected to see a few guards, a few transport vehicles. But there was nothing. No movement, just an eerie stillness. Kyle's instincts told him something was wrong. He moved cautiously, checking his surroundings. His communicator beeped again, but this time, it wasn't a message from Vela. It was a warning from the station's security system. Warning: unauthorized access detected. Please clear the area immediately. The message flashed across his screen, and Kyle's heart skipped a beat. He glanced around, trying to make sense of what was happening. Then he saw them. A group of Exarillion guards approaching from the distance, moving quickly and purposefully. They were armed, and they weren't there for a friendly conversation. Kyle's chest tightened. He knew they had been looking for him. He had sussed that his presence on the planet wouldn't go unnoticed. But now, they were closing in on him. He had to act quickly. He ducked into an alleyway, his mind racing. He needed a way out, a way to escape without being caught. But he couldn't outrun them. They knew the terrain better than he did. They would catch him eventually. The only option was to hide. Kyle's eyes scanned the area. A narrow passageway led to a small storage unit. It wasn't much, but it was enough. He darted toward it, slipping into the shadows just as the guards rounded the corner. He pressed his back against the wall, holding his breath, hoping they wouldn't see him. The guards passed by, their footsteps echoing in the distance. Kyle waited until the sound faded, then slowly exhaled, relieved. He had to keep moving. He couldn't afford to be caught. He made his way to the transport terminal, moving as quietly as possible. The shuttle he needed was still there, but it was being guarded by a pair of soldiers. Kyle knew it was now or never. He had to get on that shuttle before it was too late. With a deep breath, Kyle approached the shuttle, slipping past the guards unnoticed. He made it to the cockpit, where the pilot was preparing for takeoff. Kyle didn't hesitate. He climbed into the co-pilot's seat, his heart racing. "Get us out of here," he said, his voice calm but firm. The pilot looked at him, confused at first, but then nodded. Understood. The shuttle lifted off the ground, rising into the atmosphere. Kyle looked out the window, watching as the planet's surface slowly receded beneath them. He had made it out, but he wasn't safe yet, not by a long shot. He had no idea what was waiting for him at the capital. He had no idea what Vela had told the elders or what decisions had been made. But one thing was certain: he wasn't going to stop. Not now. Not when he had come this far. As the shuttle entered hyperspace, Kyle leaned back in his seat, staring at the stars outside. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't going to let Vela face whatever was coming alone. The shuttle hummed steadily as it traveled through hyperspace, the stars outside stretching into long, glowing streaks of light. Kyle stared out the window, his mind spinning. He had come this far, but he still had no idea what to expect when they reached the capital. Vela had warned him to stay away, yet here he was, moving closer to the heart of her world. His thoughts kept returning to her message, the fear in her words, the weight of the decisions she had made. She had left without a word, only to send him cryptic messages that raised more questions than answers. But through it all, one thing was clear: Vela cared. She cared enough to protect him, even if it meant pushing him away. And that, more than anything, kept him going. The shuttle pilot, a Xarillion with dark green skin and sharp, focused eyes, was quiet as he flew the ship. Kyle had never felt more out of place in his life. He was surrounded by alien technology, alien beings, and yet all he could think about was finding Vela. He had to make sure she was okay. He couldn't leave her to face whatever the elders had planned for her. The pilot glanced over at him, his gaze questioning. "You know, human," he said, his voice deep and calm. "It's rare for one of your kind to make it this far into our space. Most humans avoid us after the first meeting." Kyle raised an eyebrow, trying to make sense of the comment. "I'm not most humans, I guess," he replied with a small, tired smile. "I just need to find someone." The pilot nodded, his expression unreadable. "If you seek Vela, you will find her. But be prepared. There are forces that do not welcome your presence." Kyle stiffened at the words, but said nothing. He couldn't afford to let fear stop him now. He had come this far, and he wasn't about to turn back. Hours later, the shuttle dropped out of hyperspace, and the capital city of Cerilia 7 loomed ahead. It was unlike anything Kyle had ever seen. The city was a mixture of sleek, futuristic structures and ancient stone temples, with tall, spire-like buildings reaching toward the sky. The streets below were bustling with alien life. Cerilians, of course, but also beings from other species he didn't recognize. The city was alive, vibrant, and full of energy. The shuttle descended toward a landing pad on the outskirts of the city.